I never planned to ask my neighbor for help with my love life, mostly because my love life had the survival rate of a mayfly and my neighbor, Maya, had the emotional intelligence of someone who could probably diagnose my problems just by the way I held my keys. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind that smells like burned toast and unfinished dreams, and I was standing in my kitchen rehearsing a conversation with myself because I had a date on Friday and absolutely no confidence left in my system. My reflection in the microwave looked like a man who had been ghosted enough times to qualify for a paranormal investigation. I kept practicing lines out loud, casual lines, confident lines, lines that didn't sound like I was apologizing for existing, and every version sounded worse than the last. That's when I heard the familiar knock, 3 soft taps, and before I could pretend not to be home, Maya's voice floated through the door asking if I had borrowed her phone charger again. I opened the door, charger in hand, and somehow blurted out the truth like a confession I'd been holding for years. I told her I had a date and I was terrible at them, that my brain turned into soup whenever a woman smiled at me, and that I didn't want to mess this one up because this time, for once, I actually liked the person I was going to meet. Maya leaned against the doorframe, studying me with that half-smile she always wore, the one that made it impossible to tell whether she was amused or about to say something that would rearrange my entire week. I asked her, half joking and half desperate, if she could help me practice, maybe give me tips, maybe tell me which parts of my personality to hide until at least the 3rd date. She didn't laugh. She didn't hesitate. She just tilted her head and said, "Then practice on me first." The words landed heavier than I expected, like a sentence that wasn't supposed to mean anything but somehow meant everything. I felt my face heat up, my brain stutter, and my carefully constructed panic return at full volume. Practice on her. Maya, who lived next door, who borrowed sugar and returned it with baked cookies, who laughed with her whole body and listened like every word mattered. I tried to play it off, told her I didn't mean that kind of practice, but she raised an eyebrow and stepped inside anyway, setting her bag down on my counter like she belonged there. She said it wasn't a big deal, that pretending was easy, that sometimes pretending was the only way to learn what was real. She told me to sit, so I did, and then she sat across from me like we were already on a date, legs crossed, eyes locked onto mine. She asked my name like she didn't already know it, and when I answered, she smiled like she was genuinely pleased to meet me for the first time. The room felt different, smaller, charged in a way I couldn't explain. She asked about my job, my hobbies, the things I did when I was alone and no one was watching, and for the first time in a long time, I answered honestly instead of trying to impress. She listened without interrupting, nodded at the right moments, laughed softly when I made a self-deprecating joke, and somehow made me forget that this was supposed to be practice. At some point, she stopped me mid-sentence and told me to look at her when I talked, really look, not like I was afraid of being judged. She told me confidence wasn't about saying the right things but about believing I deserved to be heard. The way she said it, calm and sure, made it feel less like advice and more like a truth I'd been avoiding. We practiced introductions again, then small talk, then silence, the comfortable kind that didn't need to be filled. She leaned forward once, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, and asked me what I was really afraid of on dates. The answer slipped out before I could stop it. I told her I was afraid of being seen and found lacking, of someone realizing I wasn't as interesting or as put together as I pretended to be. She didn't pull away. She just reached out and placed her hand over mine, warm and steady, and said, "Then stop pretending." That moment felt like something dangerous and beautiful all at once, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff and realizing you wanted to jump. When she finally stood to leave, the practice date somehow unfinished and yet complete, she told me I'd do fine on Friday as long as I remembered that I didn't need to perform to be worthy. At the door, she paused and said, almost casually, we can practice again if you want." After she left, I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, wondering when helping had started to feel like something else entirely. If this story already has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this is only the beginning, and what comes next changes everything. Friday arrived faster than my nerves could process, and all day my mind kept drifting back to Maya's living room date that wasn't a date, replaying the way she looked at me like I wasn't a project to be fixed but a person worth knowing. I tried to focus on my actual date, the restaurant reservation, the shirt I'd ironed twice just to keep my hands busy, but every time I practiced my smile in the mirror, I heard Maya's voice telling me to stop pretending. An hour before I was supposed to leave, there was another knock at my door. This time, when I opened it, Maya was standing there in a simple dress, hair loose around her shoulders, looking like she had stepped straight out of a version of my life I hadn't dared to imagine. She said she had 5 minutes and thought one last practice round might help. I should have said no. I should have told her I was already late. Instead, I stepped aside and let her in, because some instincts are louder than logic. We didn't sit across from each other this time. We stood in the middle of the room, close enough that the air between us felt alive. She told me to pretend she was the woman I was meeting, to say what I would say if I wasn't afraid of the outcome. I took a breath and told her she looked incredible, that being around her made me feel calmer and braver than I usually was, that sometimes the best part of my day was hearing her knock on my door. The silence that followed was thick, unignorable. She didn't tease me or correct me. She just smiled, softer this time, and said, "Good. That's honest." Then she surprised me by saying it was her turn, and she told me that watching me over the past year had been like watching someone slowly learn how to take up space, that she admired my kindness and the way I tried even when I expected to fail. She admitted she had said yes to practicing because she wanted to see what it would feel like to be seen by me, even if it was just pretend. The realization hit me all at once, dizzying and terrifying. This wasn't just practice for her either. Before I could overthink it, before fear could reclaim its throne, I asked her what would happen if we stopped pretending. She looked at me for a long moment, then stepped closer and said, "Then you might miss your date." I glanced at the clock, then back at her, and felt something settle inside me, quiet and certain. I told her the truth, the kind I'd been avoiding for years, that the idea of leaving right now felt wrong, that the only person I wanted to sit across from tonight was already standing in my living room. Her smile widened, equal parts relief and excitement, and she said she'd been hoping I'd say that. We didn't rush anything after that. We talked, really talked, about past disappointments, about how easy it was to hide behind politeness and jokes, about how rare it felt to be chosen without having to audition. Eventually, I canceled the other date with a message that felt honest and kind, and when I put my phone down, Maya reached for my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. The practice date turned into a real one, then another, then 100 small moments that felt like proof that sometimes the right connection is closer than you think, waiting for you to be brave enough to recognize it. If this story made you smile, reflect, or believe a little more in unexpected love, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there are many more powerful stories like this coming your way, and you won't want to miss what's next. What no one tells you about choosing the unexpected is that happiness doesn't arrive with fireworks. Every day, it arrives quietly, disguised as routine, and then one morning you realize your life has changed shape without asking permission. The morning after I canceled my date and stayed with Maya, I woke up to sunlight spilling across the same ceiling I'd stared at for years, except this time it felt unfamiliar, like the room belonged to a newer version of me. My phone buzzed with a message from her even though she lived 12 steps away, something simple about coffee and whether I took sugar, and I remember staring at the screen longer than necessary because it felt surreal that someone I cared about was now choosing me deliberately, not out of convenience or habit, but because she wanted to. We took it slow, not because the feeling wasn't strong, but because we both knew what rushing had cost us before. We became experts at the in-between moments, shared grocery runs, late-night conversations through open doorways, laughter over burnt toast, silence that didn't demand explanations. And yet, beneath that calm, there was fear, not of each other, but of losing something that finally felt right. I caught myself rehearsing again, not for dates this time, but for possible endings, for arguments that hadn't happened, for imaginary futures where happiness slipped through my fingers because that's what it had always done before. One evening, weeks later, Maya asked me why I still flinched when things were good. The question wasn't accusing, it was curious, gentle, like she was inviting me to step into honesty instead of dragging me there. I told her the truth, that part of me was still that man in the kitchen, practicing lines alone, convinced that love was temporary and conditional, that eventually she'd see something in me that made her change her mind. She didn't interrupt. She didn't reassure me with empty promises. She simply told me that love wasn't about convincing someone to stay, it was about allowing them the freedom to choose you every day, even when they saw your flaws up close. She said she wasn't perfect either, that she carried her own scars, her own exits planned just in case. That night, something shifted. We stopped guarding ourselves against hypothetical losses and started showing up fully, messy parts included. Life tested us soon after, the way it always does when you start to feel safe. Work stress, misunderstandings, old insecurities resurfacing at the worst moments, but instead of pulling away, we leaned in. We learned how to argue without cruelty, how to apologize without pride, how to listen without preparing a defense. And through it all, I kept thinking about how close I'd come to missing this because I was too busy preparing for rejection instead of recognizing connection. One night, standing in the hallway between our apartments, Maya laughed and said, "Funny how practicing for a date turned into practicing for a life." I realized then that the practice had never been about impressing someone else, it had been about learning how to be present, how to be honest, how to believe I was worthy of something real. If you've made it this far into the story, it means something resonated with you, maybe the fear, maybe the hope, maybe the reminder that sometimes love is closer than you think. Don't let these stories pass you by. Subscribe to the channel, stay with us, and keep believing in the unexpected turns that can change everything.